explicit connotations. I'm Elise from the Crowdfunded Translation Project, and wanted to just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik Women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 2018, publishing a grand total of 894 issues. In addition to being a platform for theoretical and ideological debate, they were also a source of excellent political journalism. Their real-time analysis of political developments in Chile, the rise of the Unidad Popular, the looming coup, and the limits of electoralism has aged extremely well, and is well worth reading for anyone interested in the period. The Chilean left is sort of in a media bubble, and the Anglosphere left really doesn't do a great job of breaking that bubble and really building connections there. So the discussion that you hear in English about Chile, even in supposed left outlets, such as Jargon, often has little or nothing to do with the state of discussion amongst comrades in Chile. So this is part of my attempts to contribute to sort of breaking down that bubble and fostering some understanding of the thought amongst revolutionaries in Chile, both historically and currently. I have so far translated 7 articles, including a long read on electoralism versus armed struggle called Chile, the Ballot or the Bullet by Punto Final editor Manuel Caviese, and currently am working on various pieces of political analysis from the eve of the electoral campaign that would bring Salvador Allende to power, or at least to government. These include discussions of electoral versus revolutionary strategy and how and to what extent these things can coexist, discussions of US imperialist interference in Chilean politics, One of the challenges of this project, since its inception, has been getting the word out. The billionaire-controlled black box algorithms that dominate our lives don't like small creators or small projects. Nor are they particularly keen on ideological viewpoints that are inconsistent with the whims of billionaires. What's more, they positively detest anyone who isn't paying for reach. And then they turn around and make it ever harder to do even that in a useful way. The result of all this is that there are definitely considerably more people who would be interested in this project than actually see any of my posts about it. And that's why I have a small favor to ask you. Tell your friends about the crowdfunded translation project. Share the completed translations, link the Patreon and the Facebook pages. All those links are in the description. Let people know that this project exists and what it's all about. Let them know that I want to hear their ideas for future crowdfunded translation projects at crowdfunded_translations@elisehendrick.com. And if you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Ultimately, the crowdfunded translation project is for us all. The whole idea is to translate texts that have fallen through the cracks by making it economically viable for a professional translator, i.e. me, to work on them and to make the results freely available to everyone. I think that a lot of great things are coming out of the project, and even more can result from it yet. But it all depends on making the project visible to the people who might benefit from it and consider supporting it. Thank you for watching for this length of time. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that it will encourage you to get in touch with the crowdfunded translation project, look at our translations, to get in touch with, to get involved with the crowdfunded translation project. Make suggestions, read the translations, let people know that this exists. This could be a great resource, but it's been a real fucker trying to get the word out about it. So thank you very much. Even watching this and commenting and leaving a like and sharing it on your platforms, or even to yourself in an email apparently, will help increase the visibility of this video and thus of this project. Thanks so much, and see you on the next stream. Thank you very much. Even watching this and commenting and leaving a like and sharing it on your platforms, or even to yourself in an email apparently, will help increase the visibility of this video and thus of this project. Thanks so much, and see you on the next stream. Just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 2018, publishing a grand total of 894 issues. In addition to being a platform for theoretical and ideological debate, they were also a source of excellent political journalism. Their real-time analysis of political developments in Chile, the rise of the Unidad Popular, the looming coup, and the limits of electoralism has aged extremely well, and is well worth reading for anyone interested in the period. The Canadian left is sort of in a media bubble, and the Anglosphere left really doesn't do a great job of breaking that bubble and really building connections there. So the discussion that you hear in English about Chile, even in supposed left outlets, such as CROWDFUNDED, often has little or nothing to do with the state of discussion amongst comrades in Chile. So this is part of my attempts to contribute to sort of breaking down that bubble and fostering some understanding of the thought amongst revolutionaries in Chile, both historically and currently. I have so far translated 7 articles, including a long read on electoralism versus armed struggle called Chile, the Ballot or the Bullet by Punto Final editor Manuel Cabiese, and currently am working on various pieces of political analysis from the eve of the electoral campaign that would bring Salvador Allende to power, or at least to government. These include discussions of electoral versus revolutionary strategy and how and to what extent these things can coexist, discussions of US imperialist interference in Chilean politics, One of the challenges of this project, since its inception, has been getting the word out. The billionaire-controlled black box algorithms that dominate our lives don't like small creators or small projects. Nor are they particularly keen on ideological viewpoints that are inconsistent with the whims of billionaires. What's more, they positively detest anyone who isn't paying for reach. And then they turn around and make it ever harder to do even that in a useful way. The result of all this is that there are definitely...
Hello and welcome to Hyperpolyglotting with Elise. I'm Elise, translator, writer, and editor with 20 working languages, and this is a stream where we're low-key just trying to learn all the languages if we can, which seems unlikely, but, you know, you try to get as close as you can, really, with these things. How's everybody doing, chat? Let's see what we've got to look at. I saw a bunch of interesting things. Actually, when I was just going through my recommendations, let's see what we might start with. This Nick guy, who I have watched a couple of videos from, mostly related to Evil Dia and the many things that Evil Dia gets wrong about comprehensible input. Actually, I should just pause real quick. I will be back in just a minute.
Hey, implicit connotations. I'm Elise from the Crowdfunded Translation Project, and wanted to just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik Women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 20...
Okay, yes, sorry about that. There's some just somewhat complicated goings on going on, and I just had to make sure that my assistance was not needed. It isn't, so what I was saying was, this Nick guy is somebody I have looked at a few times on stream. He has had some interesting videos, mostly about things Evil Dia gets wrong. And he has a video called You Don't Understand Comprehensible Input. And I'm quite curious to see what he's talking about, because he's had some pretty sensible stuff on the subject. I think he's done a pretty good job of explaining these things. I'm going to drop the link in chat to the whole video for anyone who wants to see it. And let's go. As always, let me know if I need to make any adjustments to the audio levels. And here we are.
When we start learning a language, we bring in all these assumptions about what language is. And when we try to discern which language learning methods are best, well, that depends on what we think languages are made of.
Okay, this is an excellent point he's making here. It's a point I've also been making when talking about how Evil Dia approaches anything to do with comprehensible input, input-based language methods, and all that stuff. Because it's true. You have to... How you approach addressing a task, doing a thing, depends entirely on how you conceptualize the thing. And I've often thought that the big problem that sort of affects everything Evil Dia has to say about input-based methods is that he sees this, and he's definitely not alone in this. This is a very common thing. He sees language acquisition fundamentally as a memorization task, and so he evaluates methods and applies methods based on the assumption that the idea is to memorize as many things as possible in as short a possible time. But that's certainly not the only way, and a lot of people would argue, and I would agree, not the correct way to really conceive of the entire thing.
Classical mainstream model of language learning that we all start with is very simple. Languages are fundamentally made from two things, definitions and rules. So the best method to learn a language is the method that teaches us rules and definitions as efficiently as possible.
Yes. And if you look at it, I would add here that if you look at traditional methods, methods that you still find in schools in a lot of places, the idea is that everything is to do with what you could call the front end of language, namely talking, the words that come out of your mouth, the grammar that strings them together, and all of that. That is sort of the front end. And totally neglects the back end, which is why you can get through several years of schooling in a particular language, do rather well in terms of the marks you get, and maybe even sort of stumble out some phrases, but not necessarily understand a word that comes back, because there's this whole back end, which is the comprehension of the messages, the network of associations that allows groups of words that you hear in the language to actually make sense. And traditional methods just sort of say, you do the front end and the back end will follow. And input-based methods say that's backwards, that actually you need to do the back end first, the part where your brain understands these things and has these associations that allow it to understand the relationships between words in a phrase, And from there, you can start to actually produce language, and the front end will come from there.
And we use this criteria when it comes to comprehensible input. And that leads us to say, well, comprehensible input isn't a good language learning method. It doesn't teach you definitions and rules fast enough. So therefore, comprehensible input is a slow, inefficient way to learn a language. But what if our assumptions are wrong? What if language learning isn't fundamentally built from definitions and rules? If the classical model is wrong...
And what if the rules that we need in order to actually string together sensible sentences and understand what comes back in languages are actually a much larger and much less completely understood category of things than what you find in a grammar book? What if there's a whole universe of grammar that isn't even in the books because people haven't actually worked out that these rules even exist, even though we're using them and applying them all the time without thinking about it in at least our native languages?
Then before we judge any language learning method, we have to ask a more basic question. What is a language actually made of, if not definitions and rules? What I'm going to show you in this video is...
Okay, I'm very interested in this. First of all, the premise makes perfect sense. I mean, I have to say, I have generally been quite impressed with the quality... Hallo Geostick. Bist hier zum ersten Mal, nicht wahr? One of the things that I've been impressed with is that he actually is looking at methodology on this level, and a lot of the content on here really doesn't. Because if you want to talk about methodology, you have to think about it conceptually. You have to say, okay, what am I doing with this? What is the actual thing? And you have to get into a whole kind of more philosophical area. Oh, okay. Well, welcome back. Good to see you. You have to get into this whole philosophical area about, like, what are we actually doing here? And so much content on the subject really doesn't deal with that. And it makes the discussion a lot harder than it has to be, in the sense that we're talking, because people are talking past each other often when talking about method, when debating about method in this space.
Of comprehensible input actually assumes a completely different model of what language learning...
Incidentally, Geostick, or Geostick, not sure how you pronounce that, you can let me know. It's kind of good timing to have a German speaker in the chat, because one of the videos that had shown up in my Recs, and I thought might be kind of cool to look at, was a video that is from a channel I've never heard of, talking about the German words they really ought to teach you earlier, because they're really the key to sounding more natural in the language. And I thought that sounded like a very interesting subject to talk about, because there definitely are lots of little words that are kind of hard to define. Here again, we get into this area where there is all sorts of grammar that nobody actually really tells you about because it's poorly understood, but we add on that kind of analytical level, even though we use it all the time. And so I'm very interested to see what that's going to be about. That might be the next thing we look at.
Is. And what we're going to see is that this model explains native-like fluency far better than the classical model does.
Okay. And okay, that is also à la française, Geostick. Okay, parfait. Yeah, that what he did there actually was really good too, because when we talk about a method, when we talk about what we're doing, it is a useful thing to do to start from the intended goal. And if the best case scenario, what are you trying to do if the method is an absolute blazing success? And the absolute blazing success outcome of trying to learn a language is, of course, what he said, native-like fluency. It is the thing that a lot of people probably aren't going to get to, but that you would say you absolutely did well if you did. Like, that would be, I think everybody universally would agree that that is an ideal outcome.
Of comprehensible input is this: we acquire a language by understanding messages in that language.
That's crashing.
But notice the word messages doesn't appear anywhere in the classical model. The classical model gives us definitions and rules, so what exactly is a message? Well, let's watch the exact demonstration Stephen Krashen gave when he introduced comprehensible input to the world in the 1980s.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, you can see that this is from a while. Like, it's interesting. The older the videos are and the more grainy the videos are of Stephen Krashen, the harder he is to tell apart from Larry David. Like, every time I look at this, it takes me a second before I think, is this Larry David?
Das ist meine Hand. Verstehen Sie das? Hand? Kopf. Das ist mein Kopf. Verstehen Sie Kopf? Ja? Gut. Kopf. And here I'll draw a picture now.
Yeah. Okay. So he again giving the simplest possible message with enough cues for people who don't know any of the words to make sense out of it, just based on, their experience, pre-existing knowledge, all that sort of stuff.
Ist gut, ja? Schön. Kopf.
He's not giving you a definition of the word hand. He's not translating a sentence. He's not explaining the rules of German. Yet when you watch this clip, he's still able to transmit a message.
And for people who often will be like, but there's no grammar study in this. Well, there's tons of grammar in what he just said. Das ist mein Kopf. So we have the fact that this is a language with an explicit form of to be. We have the verb in the number 2 position in the sentence. Das, the subject, ist the verb, mein Kopf, the noun phrase that is what we call the predicate nominative. Then you have mein, so you have a separate word that is a possessive, and it is it agrees with the noun that it's modifying. You have a lot of grammar right in that, and the more input you get, the more examples of that grammar doing different things with similar sentences will give you a detailed account of exactly how all that works. This is, Days and Words, Lamont had referred to studying as observing, and this is exactly that. You're observing a lot of grammar in the things that he just said. Like he said, das ist meine Hand. Meine, because it's feminine. So you have mein and meine, and they apply to different things. Of course, Hand is kind of a confusing example in German because normally you would expect a word that is like that to be mein. But it isn't, because German likes to throw you for a loop every now and then. But, so you're getting all that stuff. You're getting all sorts of grammar. Very simple at the start, because, you're not going to be able to, if you understand 0 words, then complicated messages are going to be beyond you.
Even though you don't know German, you still somehow understand what he's saying. In a game of charades, communication is completely non-verbal, yet the person gesturing to you can still somehow send you a message. So if a message doesn't even necessarily require words, what are we understanding when we understand a message? We're understanding...
I'm curious about this.
How pieces of experience, sounds, gestures, actions, objects relate to one another through associations.
Yeah, exactly. Associations and relationships. And this is precisely what you don't get when you're doing the sort of conventional, traditional method that is very front-end heavy, because what you're getting, they try to sort of sever things. You say, okay, we're going to do some grammar now. We're going to do some verb conjugations. Ich gestehe. Du gestehst. Gesteht. Whatever. And it severs everything from other things that it might be associated with. And the thing is, if you remember things much better if they're associated with things. In fact, if you try to recall something that is more, the more remote, the more random it is, the more likely that it's coming to your mind because you're associating it with something else. And that's true with words too. You pick up words, you remember them because they're connected with something in your head that's already there, or maybe something that shows up there at the exact same time because it's a new thing, and then it's associated with the experience of the new thing or something like that. So when you do it the traditional way, it's disconnecting all that stuff. This is like, people who think that this is all about memorization will say, well, it's cutting out the noise, it's giving you pure signal, but it's cutting out most of the signal too. It's just that you have to understand what the signal even is in order to understand what you're losing.
And Krashen points to his hand while speaking German. The message makes the relationship between the language and what you're seeing clear enough for your brain to begin connecting them. This isn't passive sponge-like absorption. You don't learn the language simply because it's floating around you. This is active participation in the recognition.
Okay, he is doing such a good job of hitting the points that so many people get wrong here. The active participation that is, because you hear people and advocates of input-based methods are also to a certain extent guilty of this, because we'll say, like, it's the lazy method, and that makes it feel like it's very passive, and a lot of people can get the idea that it's very passive, but it isn't really. It feels like it's a lot less work than doing it this conventional way, because the amount of effort per unit of, knowledge, understanding acquired is going to be considerably less. But actually, you're doing a whole lot if you're doing it properly, because you've got to engage with what you're hearing and seeing in order to make sense out of it, because it's the act of making sense out of it that gives you the new knowledge.
Of meaning. And the interesting thing is, the idea that we learn languages this way just completely breaks the classical model. It requires us to create a completely new model to even have vocabulary about what we're doing when we're watching comprehensible input.
Yeah.
What are we really...
yeah, exactly. This is really... He's doing an excellent job of getting to the bottom of so much of what is unhelpful in the discussion about input. Because these are just fundamental things. Understanding I don't know what his background is, actually. But the fact that he's actually immediately takes it to this sort of level of understanding the concept makes me feel like there was some philosophy in there. Because a lot of the time, when you're... A lot of people whose background is in more applied things, and who acquire this sort of disdain for the more philosophical... that is really all over the culture, let's be honest, will not actually go and ask that kind of fundamental question, because there's this idea that that fundamental question is getting away from anything that is directly useful.
Doing if not learning definitions and rules. We're going to call this new model the associative model. And at the most basic level, the basic building blocks are experience linked together by association. And experience is the smallest unit of conscious awareness that can be distinguished by the learner at any particular moment. And
okay, I like that definition.
Association is a weighted directional link between two experiences where activating the first...
Weighted directional link. Interesting. I hope he gets into why he added that one in there. I mean, I think what he's saying here makes a lot of sense. I'm curious about weighted.
Raises the probability that the second activates as well.
Let me, I want to look at this chart again. So, okay, we've got experiences, sensory information, so sounds, visual perceptions, physical actions and gestures, bodily sensations, emotions, situations, and events. Okay, good. I like this. And then associations, connections between experiences. And that is very interesting. The combination of, okay... Oh, I misunderstood that graphic. I thought he was saying, like, connecting apple as in the brand with the fruit. But he's just saying the sound of apple. But but that is also a form of association. It's a network. It is a whole network of associations that we're creating. Some of them are going to be very personal. Some of them are not. Some of them are going to be very shared. Some of them are going to be personal, and... and on a certain level, by having this collection of associations, it is a special case, I would say a very special case, of being part of a certain community. Because, like, think about fandoms. Think about Darmok and Tanagra. Now, either you understood immediately what I was just talking about and got the reference, and probably have a whole lot of memes, years and years of absolutely just epically good memes associated with those two words. Or you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Because you don't have those associations, because probably you don't watch Star Trek The Next Generation, or never watched Star Trek The Next Generation, and therefore, when the memes show up, you also don't have them. So you don't have the connection of Darmok and Tanagra with this idea of this. It's from this people who express everything in terms of historical and cultural references. Essentially, they talk in memes of their own, and it makes it difficult for anyone else to understand what they're talking about. And that is what this particular episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, of one generally thought of as one of the best episodes, is all about. So what you have here is you have people who have actual associations with all these sounds and things like that that are meaningful and to some extent shared. Like if I say,なんとか言おうと思ったら何も言えなくなるんだな. So if I say something like that, the world immediately, the universe of people hearing it is divided between people who have associations with those sounds that I just made and understand them, and people who don't. And what you're doing when you're acquiring a language is you're joining the people who have associations, who immediately say, okay, those were Japanese words that said, the minute you think, okay, I need to say something, you can't think of anything to say, sort of thing, or you don't. It's about creating those levels of associations. Okay, I'm liking this.
The first raises the probability that the second activates as well. The classical model says that your understanding of a language is a collection of definitions and rules you've learned to apply automatically. The associative model says your understanding is a weighted network built from experience, and what we call definitions and grammar are patterns that emerge inside that network.
Okay, I'm interested. Okay, the use of the word patterns that emerge. I mean, I think that's actually a good description. There's so many. I really appreciate this video because I think he gave a lot of thought to every single word of it, and I think what he's saying is actually, this is one of the best discussions. This is better than my video, I would say, that I did on what is comprehensible input, actually, because I did not back up and look at the conceptual question, the question, what are we actually doing here? What is the goal? What is the nature of this activity we're engaging in? And that is and that is absolutely the key to understanding all of it.
Now you might be saying, well, all that sounds very abstract. How
it
are you
is
actually going to prove that the associative model is better than the classical model? Well, we can show that it better explains the experience of native-like fluency.
Okay, and the experience, and this is another thing. I think, Justic says, I think most of this comes down to emotions, since all these things create an emotion. Oh yeah, if you smell something, you see something, everything gives an emotion, and you are associated, and there are like spontaneous associations with those things. I mean, it's like, I think it's probably a shared experience of people who have lived in more than one language community, that you have stories that you actually only tell in one particular language. And so if you try to sit down and tell those stories to somebody who doesn't speak that language, all of a sudden you have to give it a whole lot of thought, because there's all sorts of shit that you had never actually really had to think about, except in the language in which the story happened, the language that you talk about the story in. Like, I have stories that basically I've only ever told in Spanish. And then I tell them in English, and I have to think for a second. It's like, okay, what the hell is a caliphone in English? Because, and I didn't actually know, I had never seen a caliphone outside of Chile for a long time until I lived in Britain for a while. And then I realized I'm looking at a caliphone, and it's a boiler. I've never actually seen gas in a house set up that way. But okay, so
luckily all of us already have something inside our heads we can examine to find clues about how native language fluency actually works. And if you had...
I witnessed a great example of this when an American woman told an Asian woman, "You scared me to death," and the Asian woman got quite defensive over it. Oh, yeah, exactly. And actually, it occurs to me from that, I think that the woman who got offended probably wasn't Chinese, because Chinese speakers use the word for like use death associations just to be emphatic too. Like you can say like "好吃死了," and it's like it's so tasty you will die, sort of thing. I don't know if that was grammatically correct. My Chinese isn't the best, but I know that you can add 死了, like so much so that you died, just to make something emphatic. But yeah, exactly. Because either also, I mean, there's also just the words that we would use in different languages. Like in Japanese, you would not say scare. Okay. Yeah, like in Japanese, the word you would use actually is more like surprised. In fact, you would not say "you scared me" a lot of the time. You would say, like, I was surprised just now. Bikkurishita. Like, so it isn't, I'm not saying you did anything. I'm saying I had the experience of bikkuri, which is like, to be like, like, so if you were to say, so, like, literally it avoids ever actually saying you did anything, and it does not also, and death isn't in there either. So yeah, yeah, exactly, these associations are, they map very differently.
And guess that's your native language. We're going to be examining our native languages. So instead of just saying, well, kids learn this way, therefore we should, we're only going to look at how we experience our native language right now and show that what we experience is best explained by experience and associations.
And the trouble with this as well, like from the point of view of somebody who hasn't already acquired another language, is that it's really actually kind of hard to conceive of these things if you are, if you only have the one language, because then it's just the way things are. Then it's just, the way you think of the thing. You have to actually have the experience of having gone from not having any associations at all with a series of sounds, like a conscious recollection of that, to being in a situation where these sounds, these, phrases, these combinations of sounds can actually evoke things for you. And that is difficult if you haven't already done it.
As opposed to definitions and rules. I'm going to demonstrate 4 phenomena in your native language, and by the end, I think it will be obvious which model explains them better. Phenomenon number 1. You can't define words that you know very well.
Okay. Oh, very good. Yes.
To define the word love. Go into your head, locate the word love, crack it open, and tell me the definition. Yeah, I mean, there's so many words, like define, like words that you use a lot. Like, I mean, there are things like, okay, what is the definition of like in the way that I just used it? I use it all the time. I don't think there is a definition, actually, in this particular context for this particular usage.
Or like, well, let me think. I was talking about, there's this video that I think we're going to look at next that is about German words they really ought to teach you earlier. And German is full of these, like doch. You know, as in, der hat sie doch nicht alle. Or, well, as opposed to der hat sie doch nicht alle. Like, if you try to ask a German native speaker, ich zum Beispiel, you know, to define doch, that is going to be difficult to actually, because, well, it depends on how, because the inflection matters. Because there's a difference between doch and doch. For example, oh, geht, yeah. Yeah, I mean, all the different ways geht works, for example. Or schließlich. Schließlich is another one. I mean, it's interesting. It gets thrown in. You see this when you watch, like, dubbed, German dubs of things. Because a lot of the time, in the English original, there will be no word in there that is equivalent to schließlich. Because schließlich is kind of a vibe. It's a very vibe-based thing. So you ask somebody, put them on the spot, okay, define schließlich. They're not necessarily going to be able to do it. I mean, I would have to really think about that, and I'm somebody who is a professional thinker about these things.
If you notice, when you reach for what love means, you don't find one clean definition sitting in a drawer. And that should bother us if words are supposed to be stored definitions.
Yeah.
If a word were truly an atomic definition, then defining it would be the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
You crack it open.
Yeah, you literally would have to be able to give a ready-made definition if you were using it. If we accept this model. And it wouldn't have to be a correct definition, it's worth noting. It would just have to be readily available to you. Because you can, of course, use words wrong. A lot of people do. Everybody does, you know, sometimes, probably. But you would have to have a definition. And yet, I think most people, if you put them on the spot, could not define most of the things that they say. Most of the words that they use. Maybe the nouns. The nouns they could probably manage, especially the concrete, tangible nouns. You know, schließlich is used quite a lot, actually. People use it like, it is... I'm not talking about schließlich in the sequential way. I mean it in the sense of, ja, natürlich mache ich das gerne für Sie. Schließlich bin ich dazu da. You know, where it's like, in English, I would not actually use an adverb there at all. I would say, that's what I'm here for. But in German, you use this schließlich there to say, you know, it's like, if I had to put it into English there, I would say after all. And after all, when you think about it, is the same problem when you try to define that. Because most of the time it has nothing to do with after, and it has nothing to do with all. There's no time. It's time words, but it's not a time thing. Same thing with German. Schließlich, also zum Schluss. The time words again, but not a time thing. And when you try to sit down and define why you're saying that, then
your head and you read off what's inside. But that's not what happens. It seems instead that you don't have immediate access to a definition at all. To produce one, you have to start reaching for experiences tied to the word love. Maybe you start thinking about feelings associated with love. Or maybe you look at
you would probably end up saying, you would probably end up describing it in terms of people that you associate the word with, or things you would, actions that you associate the word with.
which one person said to the other, I love you, either in your own life or maybe in a movie or a story. Your brain doesn't reach for some atomic meaning first. It reaches for experiences, feelings, situations, relationships. And notice how strange that is. You understand love deeply. You recognize...
Yeah, it's funny. We understand this on a level that we don't realize, because think about movies involving androids or robots or something like that. And think about the way they talk about things. Data, if you're talking about Star Trek or something. Well, if they, and it's almost universal, they will have a pat definition for the words they use. They will actually have a dictionary-worthy definition of the thing, even if they don't actually necessarily comprehend the thing on that level. Which is, so we already understand on a certain level that this is not how any of us actually engages with language naturally. And yet we don't think about it that way when we talk about learning a language. Which is weird, really.
Across completely different situations, and you use the word very naturally. But when I ask you to produce the definition that supposedly constitutes your understanding, you can't simply read it out of your mind. And that's because the classical model has the order backwards. It imagines that the definition comes first, and that allows us to understand...
This is what I was saying about front end and back end. Because the conventional method says you build the front end, and the back end will follow. Except the back end is all of this stuff. All of this stuff on the right.
Each use of the word.
I mean...
Our experience runs in the opposite direction. We encounter the word in thousands of situations. It becomes connected to different people, feelings, actions, etc. Then if someone forces us to define it, we try to construct a definition from that enormous collection of relationships.
Yes.
In other words, we don't understand the use cases because we understand a definition. We're able to do something resembling a definition because we understand the use cases.
Yeah, and in fact, and this is not just us being asked by random people to define words we're using. This is lexicographers. If you look at how actual dictionaries are put together, it isn't just somebody in an office saying, well, this is the correct way to use this word. They have huge piles of corpus material, of actual use cases. I mean, sometimes with some dictionaries, there's the new Afrikaans dictionary that they were putting together a few years ago. I don't know if they're done with it yet, but I haven't heard news about it in a while. It was just in this documentary on SABC about the Afrikaans language. And they were talking about how the collective that was putting together this dictionary was actively going out to Afrikaans-speaking communities all over the country, including people who spoke variants of Afrikaans that were historically marginalized by the state and the society, to solicit their input into the words they actually use, and examples and things like that, so that it would actually represent the whole language. So even the paradigmatic version, so paradigmatic that he uses it as his picture here to define definition. The way we get a dictionary is actually that we look at lots of use cases and we try to abstract from those use cases to come up with a definition.
And the associative model explains that very naturally. Love is not an atomic definition floating around in our head. It's a dense cluster of experiences connected by associations. Remove every feeling, relationship, experience, sentence, and concept love has ever been connected to. And it's difficult to imagine what meaning would actually remain. So definitions are real and useful, but they're not primitive categories that explain how we understand words. A definition is just a compressed description of related...
I mean, actually, the fact that he says primitive categories also makes me think there's some philosophy that he's been through.
Experiences. Phenomenon...
Because primitive being used in that way is the sort of thing you hear from people who've read a lot of who've read a lot of philosophy from like 100, 200 years ago, because we kind of stopped using primitive in that way in English a long time ago. Which is why it's weird when we hear like the translation, the English translation of Marx's ursprüngliche Akkumulation as primitive accumulation, which made sense to people in the 19th century when they translated it because they were using it that way, the term primitive in English. But it actually, there's a lot of discussion about retranslating the term, because first of all, we don't use primitive that way anymore, and second of all, it has all sorts of fucked up colonialist connotations.
Number 2, words you know seem to pull other words. I'm gonna put a few phrases on the screen with the last word missing.
Okay, so we've got peanut butter and pepper, salt and dreams, thoughts and hopes, hopes and almonds. It takes actual effort to fill in the blank wrong there, because all this shit is just reflexive. These are just phrases. Like apples and pears.
Each of those words pulls another word from your mind without any conscious thought. Again, that's a strange phenomenon. For instance, why does jelly immediately get pulled from your brain here as opposed to any of the other tens of thousands of words you know? Why didn't your brain hand you screwdriver or television? The definition of
peanut butter and television. Well, I mean, that would be a very difficult Brotaufstrich.
It doesn't contain jelly. Peanut butter is a spread made from ground peanuts. Jelly is a sweet spread made from fruit. Nothing in either definition explains why activating the first should make the second easier to access.
And I would imagine this is also a very regional thing within English, because peanut butter and jelly is like the association in the US, and I'm pretty sure also in Canada. Hey, Riveroon! Good to see you. I've been kind of worried, I have to say. I hope you've been okay. I actually was like checking, because I'd sent you a message on the Discord when I realized I hadn't seen you for a while, because I'm used to seeing you every single time. And I hadn't seen anything, so I was like checking to see if there was anything, because I was actually kind of worried. So very good to see you. Like, I don't think it would have that same, because peanut butter and jelly are not really the thing that you put on your bread, say, in Britain. In fact, I don't think I've ever actually seen people using peanut butter at all in Britain. Of course, I'm also not usually awake for breakfast.
There's also no grammar rule that connects jelly or peanut butter. So again, very strange in the classical model. But in the associative model, this is exactly what we'd expect. You've encountered peanut butter and jelly together so many times that hearing peanut butter raises the probability that jelly gets activated. Or in other words...
Activated jelly. Yeah, peanut butter and peppers. Well, and now I'm like, okay, maybe that's a thing. I don't think it's a thing, to be clear. Yeah, I mean, I had to actually deliberately think to throw something else in there. Because, of course, the reflexive pull is so hard. Oh. Yeah, thank you for the reply, and it's really good to see you. Oh, I'm glad. It's just like when somebody who's there every single time isn't. It's like, okay, did something happen? So I'm glad to see you. That's great. That actually low key kind of made my day, because that's been like sort of a low key bit of like, okay, did something happen there? Did I say something really fucked up? Or are they okay and everything? Leberwurstaufstrich is the go. Yes. Leberwurst. Well, Nutella also has a fairly strong representation in the southern part. That was, I mean, when I was living in Oberbayern and Mittelfranken, that was what people tended to put on the bread.
Peanut butter is heavily associated with jelly. And this seems to describe our experience of real-time comprehension very well in our native language. When somebody speaks to you in your native language, your mind isn't passively sitting there waiting for each new word to arrive so it can look up its definition. Everything you've already understood is constantly activating things that might come next.
And then in Chile, the big thing to put on the bread is pebre, which is this amazing salsa-like creation. Oh, yes, Vegemite. This amazing... Yeah, and Marmite in Britain. Vegemite's Australia. Marmite is actually much more intense than Vegemite as well. But, pebre is basically impossible to make outside of Chile and probably Peru, because you just can't get the right chilies for it, and if you don't have the right chilies for it, it just doesn't taste right. But pan con pebre is a very common thing that you find at breakfast, and then at all meals, really, as just sort of at least a side. And it is a wonderful and delicious thing.
But individual word associations are only the smallest version of this phenomenon. We're gonna come back to this idea later and show just how powerful this process becomes. But to get us there, we have to talk about the third phenomenon. We recognize categories that we never consciously learned.
Yes. And this is true with grammatical categories as well. I mean, that is the whole thing when it comes down to grammar. This is why I keep talking about how there's way more grammar than anyone ever actually teaches anybody. It just exists, and we do it, and we never really give any thought to it. It's just the grammar that we have. Like, so there are all sorts of levels at which these categories happen.
Let's play a game of one of these words is not like the other.
For anyone who's just joined, I'm going to drop the link in chat here. So I have to say, this is really an excellent treatment of the subject. Like, easily, I will say, this is the best video I've seen on comprehensible input, including videos by fucking Stephen Krashen. Because okay, do you remember implicit connotations? Okay, I became aware of him because he reacted to Evil Dia and tried to explain why Evil Dia was completely misunderstanding the concept of comprehensible input and everything, and did a really good video on the subject. And there was a whole back and forth where it ended up with, like, Evil Dia reacting to Nick, reacting to Evil Dia, reacting to Nick, like, a whole thing. But anyway, so I've had my eye on him for a while as a result of that, because I thought he did a really good job explaining certain issues. Like, he, I think, very correctly pointed out that the issue that Evil Dia often has when talking about about comprehensible input is a category error, that he does not actually conceptualize the task as, you know, building this network of associations so much as memorizing a whole bunch of words and definitions. Okay, identify the word that doesn't fit as fast as 4 slides, and each slide will be on the screen for 3 seconds. Okay. Okay, I have to find... I'm going to move the chat widget so that hopefully it's not going to block it. The dog, the table, quickly, bottom, pillow, fork, mattress, blanket. Alright, so red, green, ocean, blue, ocean.
Why can we recognize the outliers in these categories unconsciously?
Okay, let me, I did not actually have enough time to read all of them. Dog, the table, the quickly, the problem, bottom left. Pillow, fork, mattress, blanket, well, yes, fork. Red, green, ocean, blue. Actually, that's kind of an outlier because ocean could be a color. I mean, it isn't a primary color name, certainly, so you could say that. But it doesn't stand out as heavily as some of these others. I saw him, I saw her, I saw them, I saw they. Okay, yeah. Interesting.
Why don't you first have to reason about what these categories
Grinding. He's grinding.
are? In the classical model, we might expect that reasoning would look like this. Okay, red, green, and blue, those are colors. Ocean is not a color, therefore ocean is wrong.
And yet ocean can be a color. I bet if you looked, you would probably find a nail polish called ocean. But it's not a primary color.
But instead, it seems like you don't even have to know what the category is to spot the outlier. If words are really just atomic definitions floating around in our heads, why can we recognize them unconsciously in a practically uncountable number of categories? Here's
Including categories you couldn't actually immediately define straight off.
the answer. There's no reason in the associative model to imagine that words are the final stopping point of emergent concepts. We've already said that a collection of experiences can become so densely interconnected that we experience the entire cluster as one singular concept. A word. But once that cluster begins behaving like a concept, it can enter into new associations of its own.
Yes.
And when several concepts repeatedly share the same associations, those overlapping relationships begin forming a larger pattern.
Yes, all of that.
Take red, green, and blue. Each word already has its own network of meaning, but those networks...
I mean, and what immediately occurs to me when I look at these three colors is there are all sorts of associations that are cultural associations that have actually very little to do with the, the color, the wavelength on the visible spectrum themselves. Like, red, for example. Well, like, that has political associations, like random ones too, because in the US, of course, somehow it ended up meaning Republicans. Hello, Ata. In normal countries, it means commos, or people who are at least somewhat close to commos. Yeah, so it's always very uncomfortable when the when the electoral maps show up, and it's like, I have to remind myself that actually if it's turning red, that's not a great thing. And blue in certain countries, in Ireland, for example, a blue shirt, that is the Irish version of a brown shirt or a black shirt. Again, with colors of things. And then green. So you have all sorts of associations, and of course, the association, like, green, when you think of it as a political association, are you associating it with, like, neoliberal sellouts? Then you might be in Germany or Canada. Or are you associating it with possibly our last hope of something that seems kind of decent, in which case you'd probably be in Britain? Or Ralph Nader, in which case you'd be in the US. And of a certain age.
All three are connected to vision, light, appearance, and the question, what color is it? Every time they occupy these same relationships, that shared pattern becomes stronger. Eventually
Well, a brown shirt is a Nazi, and a black shirt is an Italian fascist, or actually a British fascist.
overlap becomes stable enough to behave like one concept of its own, color. This is what we might call a high-order concept, a pattern of associations that becomes stable enough to start acting like a concept on its own.
Hammer, screwdriver, wrench, tiger.
And our brains seem to be...
Yeah, well, and no, this is obviously two people making introductions. Hammer, screwdriver, wrench, tiger. You know, you're introducing the wrench to the tiger.
Able to create these high-order concepts completely unconsciously in a practically uncountable number of ways. If this is...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, anything can be... yeah, very true. No, yeah, exactly. It's called macaroni and cheese. Yeah, I mean, I noticed this from, like, my alcohol markers, which will have names like glass.
Getting a little technically dense, I want to give you an analogy for this idea so you have the intuition behind what we're showing here. Think about a melody. At the simplest level, one note can be associated with another note that often follows it. But when you hear a familiar melody, you don't experience it as one disconnected chain of individual note-to-note associations. You recognize the melody as one larger shape.
Yeah, you recognize the whole. Okay, and with that, I am going to take a quick bio break. I will be back in just a couple of minutes.
Hey, implicit connotations. I'm Elise from the Crowdfunded Translation Project, and wanted to just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 2018, publishing a grand total of 894 issues. In addition to being a platform for theoretical and ideological debate, they were also a source of excellent political journalism. Their real-time analysis of political developments in Chile, the rise of the Unidad Popular, the looming coup, and the limits of electoralism has aged extremely well, and is well worth reading for anyone interested in the period. The Chilean left is sort of in a media bubble, and the Anglosphere left really doesn't do a great job of breaking that bubble and really building connections there. So the discussion that you hear in English about Chile, even in supposed left outlets, such as Jargon, often has little or nothing to do with the state of discussion amongst comrades in Chile. So this is part of my attempts to contribute to sort of breaking down that bubble and fostering some understanding of the thought amongst revolutionaries in Chile, both historically and currently. I have so far translated 7 articles, including a long read on electoralism versus armed struggle called Chile, the Ballot or the Bullet by Punto Final editor Manuel Caviese, and currently am working on various pieces of political analysis from the eve of the electoral campaign that would bring Salvador Allende to power, or at least to government. These include discussions of electoral versus revolutionary strategy and how and to what extent these things can coexist, discussions of U.S. imperialist interference in Chilean politics, of the challenges of this project, since its inception, has been getting the word out. The billionaire-controlled black box algorithms that dominate our lives don't like small creators or small projects. Nor are they particularly keen on ideological viewpoints that are inconsistent with the whims of billionaires. What's more, they positively detest anyone who isn't paying for reach. And then they turn around and make it ever harder to do even that in a useful way. The result of all this is that there are definitely considerably more people who would be interested in this project than actually see any of my posts about it. And that's why I have a small favor to ask you. Tell your friends about the crowdfunded translation project. Share the completed translations, link the Patreon and the Facebook pages. All those links are in the description. Let people know that this project exists and what it's all about. Let them know that I want to hear their ideas for future crowdfunded translation projects at crowdfunded_translations@elisehendrick.com. And if you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Ultimately, the crowdfunded translation project is for us all. The whole idea is to translate texts that have fallen through the cracks by making it economically viable for a professional translator, i.e. me, to work on them and to make the results freely available to everyone. I think that a lot of great things are coming out of the project, and even more can result from it yet. But it all depends on making the project visible to the people who might benefit from it and consider supporting it. Thank you for watching for this length of time. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that it will encourage you to get in touch with the crowdfunded translation project, look at our translations, to get in touch with, to get involved with the crowdfunded translation project. Make suggestions, read the translations, let people know that this exists. This could be a great resource, but it's been a real fucker trying to get the word out about it. So thank you very much.
And I'm back. Okay, so let's continue on with this, because this is really well done.
That larger shape is built from relationships between individuals.
Fun fact that I learned sometime in the past few weeks. Yeah, apparently the term Yankee Doodle was a term that English people used to make fun of people who, new money people from North America, like new money colonists in North America.
Individual notes. But once the pattern becomes familiar enough, the entire pattern begins behaving like a single concept on its own. It begins behaving as a high-order concept. For instance...
Yeah, and you mentally, if you know that song, you immediately, your brain is already playing the next bar of it.
I can change the key of this melody, and you still experience it as the exact same melody. That means I changed every note.
Thank you.
And you still recognize the high order structure. I can change the octave, making the pitch higher, and you still recognize the melody. I can add...
You could even change the scale it's on. You put it on one of the really ominous sounding scales, like Phrygian or Mixolydian or something, and you would still recognize the song, even though it would sound very different and have a very different vibe to it.
Add a variation, and you recognize it. I can even change the mode, and if the melody is familiar enough, you can still recognize it.
Oh, he's doing the thing that I just said. He is putting it in a different scale, and so there are some sharps in there, I believe. And as a result of that, there are what are called accidentals. Yeah, likewise, that has actually low-key made my day. I cannot actually explain why I'm feeling rather good today. But I was already And that really, seeing you in chat has actually really kind of made it, because it was like, I was just in Discord, like, okay, just kind of wondering, and so nice seeing you. And the burnout, believe me, I understand. This is a burnout intensive period in history in general, I think, for lots of people, certainly me as well.
The underlying pieces are completely different, while the larger pattern somehow remains recognizable. And notice that we didn't have to introduce any new primitive category to music called melody. We started with individual notes played in relationships, and those relationships themselves began behaving as concepts.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, this is a really important point. I hope Evil Dia, because I hold out a certain hope that Evil Dia, who is, like, engaging, has a certain level of curiosity, is engaging with these ideas, will actually try to engage on this level and understand the fundamental thing that is going on here, which is, because what Nick is doing here is actually stepping back from the discussions of method and talking about it in terms of the nature of the thing you're doing. Understanding, because what method makes sense depends entirely on how you conceptualize the task.
The melody is real. You can recognize it, you can remember it, you can compare it to other melodies. But it's not an additional category sitting underneath the notes. It only emerges from the way notes relate to one another. And now I want to
This is why one of the most important concepts in music theory, I say this as if I know a whole lot about music theory, but I don't. I've watched a bunch of, like, basic videos of in music theory, and so I have some basic ideas, and the key thing is intervals, because intervals really change everything. If you add the relationship between one note and the notes immediately before and after it, changed the entire vibe of the thing.
Same idea back to language. Two of these sets we started with were grammatical categories. Dog, table, and problem don't mean similar things, but they've repeatedly appeared in many of the same relationships inside English. Those shared relationships allow the entire cluster to begin behaving like one high-order concept. What we consciously call a noun quickly feels immediately like an outlier because it isn't included in that high-order concept. Him, her, and them have repeatedly appeared in another shared set of relationships. You don't need to know.
Yeah, and they didn't. Like, even though there are contexts in which you could say, I saw they, and it would be correct, it would be a totally different thing, because you would be saying, I saw the word they.
The name of that grammatical category to recognize that they doesn't belong. And notice what determines membership in these categories. There doesn't seem to be a rule stored somewhere deciding that dog is a noun and quickly isn't. Membership isn't rule-based, it's simply the result of shared associations.
Yes, and one of the ways you can tell how flexible these categories can be is that you could see, somebody could actually go and come up with a way that quickly is a noun. Because we do this all the time. We turn things into verbs in English all the time. Because it's easy in English, because there are no endings that are specific to these categories. In some languages, there are very clear endings that tell you what category a thing is. And you can actually sort of shift things between categories by changing endings. But in English, there are no endings, so the quickly could actually be a thing. Could be a noun. I can't think of what it would be, but it isn't impossible. The reason it isn't is because nobody's done that yet.
The weird thing is, the classical model makes this arbitrary distinction between certain high-order categories. The concept of a color doesn't require us to store any grammar rule, apparently, but for some reason the concept of noun does. But I can make really unintuitive sentences that we immediately know are nonsense using colors. I'm going to the green today. I always know...
Well, actually, I'm going to the green today isn't a good one, because you can go... actually, there are various sports, not just golf, where the place where you play it is called the green. Lawn bowling, for example, it's a bowling green. That's how that town that exists, Bowling Green, it's named after a bowling green. It is a piece of nicely manicured lawn that you do lawn bowling on. When there's also, like, you would also talk about the green in the context of golf. I always know what blue it is another one where there would be specific situations where it actually would make sense, because you would be talking about different shades of blue. Like, artists, graphic designers, people like that would see that and not immediately say that doesn't make sense, because they've had to choose between all kinds of different blues that are out there, like ocean blue and sky blue and, you know, dark blue and light blue and all that stuff. And it's like, and so that actually, these are things that would make sense in some contexts, despite him actually deliberately trying to come up with stuff that doesn't make sense.
What blue it is. I never gave it to the red.
Again, like, I mean, it's interesting. He's come up with these are, like, examples where you could, like, capitalize that R. And you're talking about you never gave whatever it is to somebody who you are calling a communist.
Why would the set of colors require no rule-based system to verify their correctness, while nouns, for some reason, do?
Or is it that there is a rule-based system, but it doesn't work on the same... it doesn't work based on the same basis?
Because one high-order concept is structural doesn't make it fundamentally different from every other high-order concept our brain can unconsciously create. Or in other words, it doesn't seem like we need to posit some separate rule-based system to explain grammatical categories. And once high-order concepts like nouns and verbs exist, they can form associations with one another just like words do. And
yes, of course, there are differences. I mean, one of the things that linguists would say is, because when we talk about the study of syntax, there is a categorical exclusion of these sorts of pragmatic things. The idea is to look entirely at form, at structure, and not at content, at meaning. So you would say, in that sense, that there is a fundamental difference there, potentially.
This set of phrases, the individual...
Okay. I have to move the chat widget thing.
Individual nouns and verbs change, but the relationship between the two high-order concepts remain recognizable. This relationship is called predication. That gives us grammar and the associative model. Grammatical categories are just high-order concepts, and grammatical structures are just associations between those high-order concepts.
Yeah, and the grammatical categories, of course, you can use them without ever actually having without ever being able to come up with the concept. In fact, most grammar is stuff that we could not actually explain conceptually. I mean, we don't think about it that way. Like, I did not think just now about the order in which the sentence has to go, that I was going to put the think before the predicate of it.
In the classical model, grammar is thought of as actual rules you store in your head. And you supposedly understand grammar when you can apply these rules implicitly, really fast, lightning fast application. But in the associative model, rules aren't things that your mind stores at all. They're descriptions of patterns that emerge through associations. So when we drill a rule to learn it, well, we're assuming that what our mind unconsciously stores is actually a rule.
Yeah, I mean, and this is why... the method of sort of repeating things to memorize is often, it can be counterproductive, because if you say a word often enough, if you drill a phrase often enough, it actually loses all meaning. For example, I mean, if you're trying to find the exact right font for a graphic that you're doing or something, and you go through and you have the words, you have the text for your graphic out there, and you're just going through your long ass list of fonts that you have on GIMP, eventually that word ceases to be anything to you. Yeah, as it changes. Suddenly, at a certain point, it's like, what the fuck even is that?
Call a rule seems better explained as an emergent pattern built from countless associations. Just like a melody emerges naturally from the relationship between notes, grammar seems to emerge naturally from the relationship between words. Once again,
I mean, another way of saying that is, see, your awareness of the melody and your awareness of the grammar emerge from the associations, but the actual thing, the melody, is an association between notes. The grammar is the association between words. It is these things.
Model explains our experience without us having to posit a separate system of implicit rules. Now what we're going to do is bring everything we've demonstrated together to explain one of the most powerful features.
Although I would say the patterns he's talking about are what we would talk about in linguistics as being potentially explicit rules, in the sense that certain patterns always repeat, because there are certain patterns that are always present and certain patterns you never see. In fact, this is a lot of the basis for universal grammar theory and a lot of the things that come out of it, which includes, in fact... Oh, Korean. Well, I will have to think about getting some more content on Korean. There's lots of stuff that I could think of. But the point that is often made in this context is that there are certain grammatical associations, grammatical concepts that every like native speaker of the language always gets right, that nobody ever has to be taught, and that don't work if you don't do them in a certain way. So you could call those rules. We acquire them through constant association.
Of native-like comprehension. Number 4, we can understand incomplete messages completely unconsciously. When you hear peanut butter, it activates jelly. But now we've shown that this process doesn't stop at individual words. High-order concepts can activate other high-order concepts. A noun-like concept in a subject position can activate a verb-like concept. So at every moment in a
Yes. Yeah, certain words are going to be associated with it.
Sentence. Everything you've activated so far is activating a weighted collection of words, meanings, categories, and structures that could plausibly...
I owe her $5 my life, but and she is, a visit, nothing. Yeah, I mean, he's done an absolutely excellent job, both of addressing this weakness, this real gap in a lot of the discussion of comprehensible input, and a lot of the debates around it, and also breaking it down in a way that somebody who is not constantly thinking about linguistic stuff and associations and stuff like that will understand. Brian, yeah, actually, Korean and Japanese grammar are extremely similar. And there's a lot of overlap in vocabulary because both have huge numbers of Chinese loanwords. And on top of that, there are predictable relationships between the pronunciation of those words in Korean and in Japanese. Like, if you know Japanese and you have a lot of, you have a good kanji vocabulary, then you can often just sort of transfer a lot of stuff over into Korean and you'll be okay. I mean, there is the whole native Korean vocabulary that you still need, but in terms of kanji, in terms of Chinese loanwords, Sino-Japanese and Sino-Korean words, there is so much overlap there in terms of both sound and meaning that is probably Korean and Japanese would have to be almost certainly the respective easiest language for speakers of the respective other language to learn. Just because there's just so much that is similar.
Come next. We'll call this collection your implicit prediction possibilities. Now, these aren't conscious guesses. You don't sit there listing every single possible continuation when someone's speaking. The possibilities are simply active, with some carrying more weight than others. To show what I mean, let's look at this incomplete sentence. He blanked down on one blank, pulled a blank out of his blank, and asked her to blank him.
Okay. He fell down on one elbow, pulled a summer sausage out of his back pocket, and asked her to beat him. Yes, they are extremely prolific. And that's before you get into the fact that there are actually 2 K-pops. Because there is also North Korean pop music, some of which is actually really quite good.
Why in the hell, using the classical model, would you ever be able to understand this incomplete sentence completely unconsciously? The only thing I can think of that explains why you understand this is high order association activation, or...
Yeah, I mean, and some of that association is going to come down to, like, what are, the other conversations you've had with this person. The things that you know are going on in relation to the thing that they're talking about. Some very specific stuff like that.
Implicit prediction possibilities. Down on 1 activates knee. What gets
Actually, I made one video in a series that I never really got back to on learning Korean through music, where I break down the lyric of a song and the the Korean and then a literal gloss and the translation and stuff like that a while ago.
Out of something when someone is down on one knee. What does someone pulling a ring out of their pocket on one knee ask a woman? Every word, grammar concept, structure, and probably countless other associations chip in to...
Pulled a ring out of his ass. He fell down on one knee, pulled a ring out of his ass, and asked her to marry him.
Illuminate the high order concept and marriage proposal. And the moment we unlock that high order concept, the sentence doesn't even feel incomplete. Every single layer is operating at once. Individual words activate related words. Grammatical concepts activate other grammatical concepts. And the relationships across the entire message activate a larger situation that narrows every blank.
Of course, let's get back to this sentence. Because again, there's a lot of grammar going in here. And it has nothing to do, actually, with the specific meaning. Like, we have the word get. Well, get is a really hard word to pin down in English. Because it's doing everything. Get does everything. To get is to receive a thing. But it's also to be allowed to do a thing. And then it's also to become, for some reason. And then you have these, like, to get down. Well, that can both mean to lower yourself physically, or it can mean to, like, be funky. And so, but then we have the fact that you can phrase it this way. He got down on one knee. So we have this verb phrase, he got down, that is associated with this noun phrase, on one knee, and we have the order. You could not say intelligibly, he on one knee got down. You could say potentially on one knee he got down. That would be okay. Pulled out of his pocket a ring. Oh, you could, would still be okay. But if you said, pocket pulled a ring, that wouldn't make sense. And all of that has to do with these syntactical associations, an entire system of them.
Feel incomplete. Every single layer is operating at once. Individual words activate related words. Grammatical concepts activate...
Yeah, get can mean to understand. And then when you move over to the Scandinavian languages, one of the things you notice, especially in Icelandic, is that we get all this weirdness around get, from the Scandies.
Grammatical concepts. And the relationships across the entire message activate a larger situation that narrows every blank. By the time each missing word is supposed to arrive, your mind has already done the majority of the work for you. Each word clearly isn't being decoded from scratch. It's landing inside a network in which it's already been activated through association.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that you actually have to, it takes more effort to come up with the wrong answers to fill in those blanks than to come up with the right ones, shows you just how ready-made a lot of these associations are.
That's what makes native-like comprehension feel fluid. Every piece of the language prepares you for the next piece. The incoming word is usually only confirming or adjusting a pattern that's already running. The classical model can tell you what knee, ring, pocket, and marry mean. Grammar rules could explain why we can anticipate the grammar. But neither definitions nor rules explain why you can remove most of the sentence, including the grammar, and still understand it completely unconsciously.
And see, here is one weakness in this, because the grammar is actually, if you remove the grammar completely, it would be, it would not be an effortless thing to understand it. If we just put these words in totally random order, you might start to notice connections between them, and that might actually allow you to eventually sort of decode it. But if, especially if it were written in front of you. But if somebody just said the words in random order to you, so you had to hear it the first time, and they didn't repeat it, and they said it at normal speed, they weren't, like, making any accommodations for the fact that they're saying words in random order, then it would not work. Then that would not work as well, because this is kind of to some extent inflating pragmatics with syntax, and those are important. There's an important distinction there, but I think the overall idea that we acquire these things through observed patterns is really a key takeaway, and is particularly important from the methodological standpoint of explaining why input-based methods work, and why methods that do not primarily rely on comprehending input don't work as well.
And this reveals the real challenge for the classical model. If native-like fluency depends on this network of associations, then any method that tries to build native-like fluency through deliberate study has to somehow recreate this network. This creates what I'll call the hard problem of study. Native-like fluency doesn't only depend on knowing what theoretically could come next.
Yeah.
It depends on having an unconscious sense of what usually does come next, and how much more likely one possibility is than another. Some associations are central and immediate. Others are weak, unusual, or only activated in very specific contexts.
Yeah, and the way you get that is through observation. And observation is what you're doing when you're engaging with comprehensible input.
And those differences in strength seem to matter constantly during real-time comprehension. If you tried to construct that network through only conscious study, you'd have to decide not only which associations to teach, but also how strongly each one should be weighted, which examples should appear most often, which meanings are central.
And this is where actually using fairly everyday things and talking about them in a fairly everyday way while making accommodations in terms of speed or whatever, and visual cues and stuff for learners makes the most sense, because you're already going to tend to get the most common version. The same voice as Michael Yes! Yes, actually! Very similar voice to Michael Parenti.
Uses are rare. Which words strongly predict one another in what direction? But when you're learning a language, that weighting system is exactly the implicit knowledge you're trying to acquire. That's the unknown.
Yeah, and you learn this implicit knowledge through implicit learning, which is what is, for people who are used to quantifying everything they do, who have gotten into this idea that you have to actually say, okay, I put in this many hours, I did this much stuff, or otherwise it doesn't feel like they did anything worthwhile. This is what makes it so hard, because you cannot really quantify exactly what's going on, the things that you're acquiring in implicit learning, because you aren't aware that it's happening until after it's already done.
That's what you don't know. That's the hard problem of study. To consciously construct a native-like network, you'd already need the native-like network to tell you which associations to add and how strong to make them. You'd have to consciously choose and weight the relationship between every word, every phrase, every concept, every grammatical structure, every situation, and every possible continuation. Nobody can build that network one deliberate association at a time.
Yeah. I mean, it is entirely through observation. You wouldn't even be able to conceptualize of it. You would necessarily have huge gaps because there's so much random shit that goes on in terms of the associations that build, like, somebody's account of a language. There's, some of it is based on experiences they had that maybe nobody else has had. Or, not necessarily in quite that way. All sorts of stuff like that. And if you wanted to make a full account of what it means for someone to have knowledge of a language, and you tried to, construct this brick by brick, you would end up, it would be a mess, really.
Most of that information is something that native speakers couldn't even explain. None of us know the probability with which one word or structure should activate some other word or structure.
Yeah.
We simply feel what usually fits.
Yeah, and you have an instinctive sense when it doesn't. It just it is almost a physical thing, like, there's something wrong with that sentence. That sentence is giving me an odd vibe.
Input solves the hard problem by removing the need to choose. The language itself supplies the examples, the frequency, context, and relationships define the weights. This is why study can efficiently teach you what theoretically could be correct while still failing to build a native-like sense of what usually is correct.
Yeah, because it is not really addressing the back end. It is not giving you, you might have this phrase, but all it's really you'd have a phrase like, I don't know, ich hätte gern ein Maß Radeberger, bitte. And you would have it associated with the English. I would like a 1 liter glass of Radeberger, a very good East German beer. But the thing is, your association is only with other words and words in another language. You aren't so when somebody says in der Flasche oder vom Fass, you aren't necessarily prepared for that. That's in the bottle or draft. But if you are putting together the back end by sitting there and really engaging and perceiving and watching these watching the language being used in context in a way that makes it comprehensible to you, then you're building those associations, and these things will just kind of come out and you will have no idea where the hell they came from. Stuff will be activated and you don't realize it's happening. I mean, I've experienced this with like Finnish, for example, which is a language I almost never get a chance to do anything with, because you mostly only run into Finns in Finland. There aren't that many Finnish speakers in the world, so outside of Finland you just don't really encounter a whole lot of them. And I have a whole lot of Finnish just that was in my head when I first went to Finland. and I only spent a weekend there the first time. And no, it wasn't even a weekend. I was there like a day and a half. But I also had a whole lot of like grammar stuff, just random grammar shit in Finnish, word endings and things like that. And I actually suddenly had a couple of them activate on me, and I just was using them spontaneously in an apparently correct way. And I thought about it, it's like, wait a second, did I just use the Tavissa form? I've never, I never really made any deliberate attempt to learn it, but I had heard the Tava form so many times in context when I was engaging in just like, ordering food and talking to people and getting my room reservation sorted out and stuff like that, that it started to make sense, and suddenly I was using it spontaneously, and that is what implicit learning is like, and that is why it is actually very hard to quantify it as you go.
And now we can finally
you don't know what's
look
sticking.
at everything we found. We couldn't define love because the meaning wasn't sitting inside our head as one atomic definition. It was distributed across an enormous collection of relationships. Peanut butter pulled jelly because concepts don't sit in isolation. Activating one concept prepares other concepts associated with it. Grammar didn't require us to add a new category of implicit rules. Lower order associations formed high order concepts like nouns and verbs, and associations between those high order concepts produced...
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't even need to know what these things are to use them. When we talk about grammar, when you have like grammar classes in school and stuff, a good deal of what we're doing is just we're being given a vocabulary to explain stuff we already kind of know.
Grammatical structure. All of those layers work together to explain how you could understand the marriage proposal sentence with most of the language missing. Your mind wasn't decoding definitions and applying rules one at a time. The entire network was active at once, preparing the meaning before it arrived. So just by examining our native language, we can show how the classical model fails to account for native-like fluency.
Yeah, okay. So... he seems to be just kind of going over the stuff we were already talking about. I'm going to drop this link in chat again for anyone who wasn't there and wants to go and look at it again. Because I think that was just really an excellent explanation of a lot of the things that get missed in the subject of when discussing comprehensible input. He had 69 likes, and now that I gave him one, it's 70. I feel bad about that. But he deserved the like. Okay. So, wow, yeah. Excellent book, excellent video there. Let's see, what can we do now? We're gonna look at some really bad language learning advice, I think. It's a 5-minute video. Understand this and you can learn any language. Now, see, I would argue that that was a good title for the video we just watched. I think that because I think those are the really key things to understand if you're going to try to acquire a language. Tony Marsh is... his whole thing is that it's like the military method and to learn the languages, and his methods are terrible.
There's one thing more than any other thing that will determine if you can successfully learn to speak a new language.
Okay. I mean, every other thing that he's done, it's just like rote memorization with extra steps. And it'll be like, you can become a polyglot in 3 weeks using this amazing method, and the method is memorization. And it'll be like, it works in any language, and it is easy to find an example of why it doesn't make sense in a number of well-known languages.
Or not. And that thing is, let's pretend you speak English and you're learning Spanish. Do you see Spanish through English, or do you see the world through Spanish?
Okay. Rarely. This is a rare thing I don't expect to repeat, but yeah, I mean, that isn't wrong. Yeah, I mean, in fact, that is exactly what we've been talking about for the past hour and a half so far, which is associations. And are you associating the language with another language, or are you associating the language with stuff in the world? So, okay, rare W for Tony.
If you're looking at the language that you're learning through a language that you already speak, there's a very good chance that you'll never learn to speak that language.
Okay, the W, the moment passed. Because I wouldn't say that you're never going to. But if your method, I will say, if your method essentially requires you to associate the language through your native language, if that is the thing that your method is always having you do, then you're going to definitely run into problems. I wouldn't say never, because you might actually find that as you're doing things using useful methods involving lots and lots of the right kind of input, that you would actually find that you're associating the language with the world rather than associating the language with another language. But okay, there we go.
But if you can learn to use the language that you're learning as a way to see the world, there's a very good chance you'll successfully be able to learn to speak that language. I'm Tony Moore.
Okay, but I think where we're going to run into trouble here is how do we do it? Oh, he's got some geometry up. He likes geometry.
Former military linguist. I've taught Spanish,
this is why the term linguist is so fucking misused in general, and I think the U.S. military is a lot of the reason that it is so. Because a military linguist is just somebody who knows a little bit of another language. Like, a linguist in any other context is somebody who studies language on a very theoretical sort of a level and tries to understand deep shit about languages. And in the military, it's somebody who can say buenos dias, baja el arma por favor, o te vamos a pegar un tiro, or something like that.
He's in Arabic to the military, NATO, and others. And in this video, I'm going to give you a minimalist, universal...
I mean, I will say, I am actually kind of... I'm willing to allow the military and NATO to be taught languages in this way, because I wish all the failure in the world on them.
That you can use to see reality in its simplest form, show you how it applies to English and...
We're going to see reality in its simplest form. Holy shit.
Spanish.
There are going to be some mushrooms in this.
Tips for how you can use it for any language. So all languages essentially do the same thing. They describe our reality.
I mean, I did not line this thing up deliberately. I have not watched this. I hadn't watched the Nick video either. But it is actually a sort of an apt thematic sequence, because I think he is about to do things very badly that Nick did very well.
On the screen here I have a cube. Let's let this cube represent space. I mean any space. It could be a room, house, city, planet, the whole universe. Doesn't matter what scale it's on. And you're inside the cube. So
you're Borg. Okay, we're Borg.
You're at home right now. The cube is your house. The cube could be YouTube, and virtually you're on YouTube. Anyway, every language is going to have a way to say that. A way to...
I am in the associational cube. Resistance is futile.
Say, I exist, I'm here, I'm present. In English, that's I am. In Spanish, that's estoy. Spanish is interesting because it makes a difference between I'm here, as in I'm present, in this particular space, and soy, which means I exist in some kind of absolute sense, not relative to the particular time and space of that cube.
Yeah, indeed.
Deals with existing. Important announcement. I'm hosting travel language learning trips in 2027.
Oh, okay, so he's selling things. It's such a high intensity voice too. It's like he's letting you in on some shit.
You can go anywhere in the world. There's a link to a survey in the description of this video. If travel language learning sounds interesting to you, go fill out the survey. Now the next thing that happens...
Oh, okay, so he wants you to pay to take him on trips. I mean, hey, nice hustle if you got it.
This cube is there are things around you. That can be persons, places, or things.
So the idea is you pay him money and you pay his way to have him along when you're traveling, I guess? For the witty repartee. And the linguistic insights, like, there is a cube. Repetition.
For example, if there's a picture on the wall, let that dot represent the picture. If there's a tree outside your window, let that dot represent the tree.
Wow, now there are 2 dots.
When there's more than one thing, we say there are. Spanish says I to denote the presence of something. And even if there's more than one, it's still I. So there are many people outside. Hay muchas personas afuera. How does the language that you're learning deal with the presence and absence of things?
Okay, but so all this is describing how the language works, though. That is absolutely not. This is like the exact opposite of how you get to the point of being able to experience the world through the language. Because all you're doing is learning to talk about the language. You learn to talk about the fact that I doesn't change because it is not an impersonal verb. And the Y is on there because in Old Spanish and in Iberian Vulgar Latin, that E is the same E that you have. It used to be spelled like H-I, when it was often a separate word, because it behaved the way E does in French, and the way it still does in Catalan, except there it's spelled H-I, and they actually I is IA in both Catalan and French, that they spell it differently. Like, you can talk about the language, but that doesn't mean that you're able to actually associate, conceptualize, and experience the world through the language.
Every language has a tool for saying what things are, naming things, and describing things.
Okay, but again, how is this going to help you actually get to the point where you are experiencing the things through the language?
For example, this is...
We're like 3 minutes through a 5-minute video here, and he has yet to provide a single useful, single insight at all in terms of how you get to the point where you're able to experience this through the language as opposed to translating.
A beautiful flower. This is a book. That is good. In Spanish, all you need is es. That's good.
No, you don't. That isn't all you need. You would not say es. You actually, for that's good, you would say está bien. You could also say es bueno, depending on the context. And oh God, Ben Stein.
Es bueno.
Who actually is a shitty right-wing economist in real life. I don't know if he's still alive. I think he might be.
Which also uses está in the same way that we talked about estoy. Está, where that thing is.
The Y on estoy, incidentally, is the same Y as I, and it comes from that same that same background of behaving like E in French.
It's on the wall. Está en la pared. The next thing that can happen is you can move. So as you see the guy going kind of from one corner to the other, every language in the world is going to have a word for I go. In Spanish, that's boy. Whenever you go from somewhere.
Like, okay, so but what does this have to do with acquiring the ability to experience these concepts directly through the language, as opposed to having to filter them through your native language? Like, where this is all this is doing is saying, this entire video is just him saying there are concepts. Well, yes, we know that there are concepts.
To another place, and that's known as prepositions.
That's not what prepositions are. I mean, yes, preposition is the category of things that denote the relationships between things, and they're called prepositions because in English and a lot of other languages, they're positioned before the thing that they modify. But in other languages, they are postpositions. And in some languages, they use case endings for a lot of this stuff.
There. Spanish, from home to the beach. De la casa a la playa. From New York to LA. De Nueva York a Los Angeles. And whenever you go from point A to point B, there's something on each side. For example,
I mean, okay, so the insight is that, again, there is going. Like, he's not describing anything really linguistically. What he's describing is there are people and there is stuff and things that get done and not done, and things that be in places, or they don't be there, or sometimes they do. And it's like, he's not telling us about language, he's just describing in the most boring possible way the universe.
Example, a street, a path, a track, a hallway, a sidewalk, whatever route you take, there's going to be a preposition to name that route. English.
That's not what prepositions do. Prepositions do not name the route. Prepositions, does he not know what a preposition is? Because the things that you would use, the hallway is not a preposition. The road, the track, not prepositions, any of them. On the track, by the track, by, on, those are prepositions, Tony. But to get back to like Nick's video, which is so much better than this, like seriously, he does not understand any of these concepts. He does not accurately name any of these high-level grammatical syntactic concepts. It is purely random whether he gets any of them right at all. But when he speaks English, he uses them correctly.
By way of, via, through, even down the street or out the window. In Spanish, that preposition is always por.
No, not always por, but mostly.
So down the street is por la calle, out the window, por la ventana. That's 100% the way everything works.
Right.
The only thing we don't have represented here in the cube is that person's perception, how they feel about it, their likes, wants, and needs, what they're thinking.
Well, I'm guessing they need a bigger cube. That's really not much of a cube. That cube sucks, actually. It's just a dot cube. Like, I mean, there's no fucking furniture in that cube. I think that's what they could use. Some cube furniture, and maybe a second cube. And I don't see a bath cube. Like, where does your notional person with no necks shit?
Sensing, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting. So I would add those verbs.
Farting.
Put them very high on your list of verbs to learn.
Like, but again, this is literally okay. He finally gave us a method here. You're going to prioritize learning certain words. Help, I've been trapped inside of a giant cube by the world's most boring grifter. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, so you're prioritizing words on a word list. This does not actually help you associate things with the universe, associate with the universe through the language. This is just, again, we get back to fucking rote memorization, which we always do with Tony Marsh. We always do, where he never leaves this cube.
Whatever language you're learning. So that cube situation is always happening. It's happening right now. It was
Oh God, we're in a cube situation.
also happening before and will also be happening later.
Okay. So there is no hope of ever being outside of the cube.
Spanish, that's antes, ahora, y después. That's why every language has a past, present, and future tense.
Every language does not actually. There are languages that don't have tenses. There are languages that handle all this stuff through aspect and context. Like, every time he says something about every language, it's fucking wrong and demonstrates how little he knows about any of this stuff.
I hope this video helps you see...
and how little he cares to know. It is like he tries to sound deep. He tries to sound insightful, despite not having any real depth of knowledge and any real insights. So he's like, okay, well, if we do an abstraction, that seems to be something that, like, really deep thinkers do, is they abstract things. We're going to use geometry. And, God, he created a fucking optical illusion here. And now I can't unsee it. Because there's, like, some sort of a diagonal surface going through the cube space, except it is an impossible shape.
Or reality in a simple and universal way. And I hope that instead of trying to learn Spanish by trying to see Spanish through English...
A loofah callback. Wow, that's going back a while. Yeah, he actually does manage to be even somehow less appealing than Kevin.
Jump to the head of the line and do what you need to do, which is see the world.
I can't do what I need to do in this fucking cube. The stuff to do it isn't there.
Through the language that you're learning. Thanks for watching.
Wait, okay, so the entire point of the video is not... okay.
Here is the most expensive language learning, and almost...
Okay, so the whole point of that video was not to tell you how to get to the point where you actually...
There's one thing.
Oh, fuck off. I didn't want to see you anymore, Tony. I was done with you. I was trying
There's
to...
one
Fuck
thing.
off. No. Tony, shut up. Oh God, I do not want to see the collab between Tony and Kevin from English for Everyone. Although, on the other hand, Kevin from English for Everyone is enough of a pedant that, I mean, just watching him correct Tony would possibly be amusing. But, like, all he does is... See, usually the way these there are a million videos on the theme of, stop translating in your head. Because translating, it is understood as kind of a barrier to really getting anywhere in the language. You have to kind of get past that or try to avoid doing it in the first place. But all he does, but every other video is how to stop doing it. Literally all this video of Tony's is... He says, you need to not do that. And then he goes, let's imagine the universe is a cube. We're going to have stuff in it, except we're just going to represent it with dots. Every language can tell you about what's going on in this universe cube. And that's fucking it. That's the whole thing. Not a useful piece of advice of how to get there. Just the most, like, fucking bog standard advice that is, oh, painful. Okay. So now we're going to just sort of switch it up. We've got about 10 minutes to go. And there's a video by somebody I've never heard of called Plastic Kokoro Heart. Standard German is utterly unhinged. And now I'm very curious. First of all, the fact that they specified Standard German, as opposed to what? But I mean,
we all know someone who thinks
German is certainly. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not unhinged. So here we go.
German sounds ugly. I wish him well. This video will teach you everything you need to know.
Okay. So let me just drop the link in chat.
About standard German so we can smoke the haters. Ah, the umlaut letters. The German language's most iconic export. And every...
I mean, yes, that is something that you recognize German from, but lots of languages have them. I mean, Turkish, let me see. Where umlauts that are pronounced the way German umlauts are roughly, and that are represented graphically in that way. Okay, that's Estonian, that is Finnish, that is Hungarian, Turkish, and numerous Turkic languages. There are a lot, actually.
German learner's worst nightmare. But
I don't know why they...
To pronounce U umlaut, all you have to do is round your lips for U while saying E. Über, Türen. To pronounce O umlaut, all you have to do is round your lips for O while saying E. Österreich, können. And A umlaut...
Yeah, no, okay, that was not how you pronounce... Oh, okay, like the vowel is roughly right, but it's not können. That would be K, that would be a long This was
round your lips for O while saying E. Österreich, können.
Okay, like for Österreich it was right. It was a long But this is können. It's two N's. Short können.
An A umlaut? Well, that's just open E. Wären. German feature.
Actually, a lot of the time those two things are pronounced roughly the same.
There's long and short vowels, but unlike English, they're always predictable. If a vowel is followed by H or a single consonant, it's elongated. But if...
Okay. I mean, you said that, but then you mispronounced können.
If you see two or more, it stays short and sweet.
Technically, CH is not two consonants. It is a single consonant sound that is represented as two letters.
Now keep this rule in mind because it's the entire reason for this.
But that said, yeah,
single...
yeah. But that being said, yeah. I mean, the A in Macht is short.
Letter S is between two vowels. It becomes voiced. Z. Unless you write double S, but...
Straße. Gibt es das überhaupt? Jetzt muss ich frag mal den Duden. Duden, Straße. Mit einem S. Gibt es das? Nee, gibt's nicht. There is no Straße.
Then that triggers the rule from earlier, and it means that the preceding vowel must now be pronounced as short. And that's why the ligature S set was created. So foreigners like me can pronounce the word Straße knowing that the A is long. To segue back to vowels for a moment.
Except, of course, in Switzerland, they don't use it. And...
German has diphthongs, and they're a bit counterintuitive. Why, you might be asking yourself? Because these two and these two are not read phonetically. Euro, Deutsch, mein, Zeit, diphthong is an inconsistent spelling. What is this, English? This isn't the time to get concerned, though, because...
yeah. Actually, not exactly. Although, when you know Middle High German, some of it makes sense, because, like, It was actually Deutsch for a long time, and it still is in Swiss German. It's Schweizerdeutsch.
The third and last diphthong breaks with this pattern and stays phonetically consistent in its pronunciation. Haus, Maus. Standard German and English just so happen to share quite a few features when it comes to consonants. So let's look at the differences instead.
VVZJR. Okay.
I think we've all done enough German impressions to know that this is read as V. But what you might not know is that what to us is a V sound in German is a F sound.
It is not always, though.
If you come from the UK, you likely call this letter Z. Well, get acquainted with its German cousin, Z, like 20. If you want to write J in German, you're gonna have to write it like this. It's because this
yeah, much more exciting. Although...
Z, like 20. If you want to write J in German, you're gonna...
Although it isn't quite pronounced J. It is used to represent J, but it is actually still pronounced like a hard Ch. To a great extent. And if you, in East Germany, in Saxony, in Brandenburg, you will actually see even more impressive consonant combinations in the place names. You'll see like TZSCH, Delitzsch, which, if I remember correctly, is someplace between Zwickau and Dessau. I passed through it a very long time ago and have had no... And the only reason I remember it is because of just the impressive number of consonants that you had together just to make ch.
I have to write it like this because this represents a y sound. About 100 years ago, the majority of Standard German speakers used to roll their R's, reden. But I'm sad to report that nowadays, the throats of millions of German speakers have been infected by the guttural R. Reden. It's also important to make the distinction that the letter R at the end of a word is pronounced like a reduced ah sound.
Not exactly. It kind of it depends a lot on just how careful somebody is speaking. Because German is kind of, and Standard High German is kind of non-rhotic. So you say Mitarbeiter. Now, if you want to get really Pinglish about it, and you want to like very stress everything, you might hear somebody say Mitarbeiter. If they're trying to make a point of saying something like that, or they want to sound like actually really creepy, to a certain extent. But mostly, Mitarbeiter. And you can get away with just saying ah. But if you want to sound refined, it's actually not quite that. It is an ow, Mitarbeiter. You're not actually pronouncing an R. It's very much like sort of estuary English, the way that's...
Like in Mitarbeiter. Bonus fact, apparently in Switzerland they still roll their R's. Please.
And in Bavaria and in a lot, actually, of Austria as well. And in opera.
To beautiful paradise, please, please. After a short stay at the asylum, I'm ready to continue this video by telling you the German has word initial aspiration like we do in English. It also devoices voice consonants at the end of words like Russian. Partially in relation to this, you may have noticed that 3 different H sounds exist.
There are actually even more than that. And when you get into regional variations, you get even more than that as well. Yeah, ach, ich, huh. Yeah, but then, like, Chemie is pronounced differently depending on whether you're in Bavaria or Austria. Or, like, Prussia.
In German, und ich doch. The reason why I decided to note this during this segment is because German speakers from Germany tend to pronounce 20 as 20, along with any other word that ends in that sound, of course. If you spent even a moment on the German-speaking side of the internet, you've probably noticed a lot of people making jokes about Bavarians, Austrians, and the Swiss.
Yes.
Speaking in eldritch tongues that are...
Imoknima is very Austro-Bavarian. It is how people in Austria and Bavaria would say, ich mag nicht mehr. Yes, yeah, totally different energy. Yeah, imoknima is, it means I don't want to anymore, essentially. And yeah.
Incomprehensible to all but those who live there. Servus. Schlag dich, du Arschloch. The charming regional accents, and what did he just say to me?
Oh, yeah, he called him an asshole.
Mache ich hier?
Du hast 21:32 die Toilette gespült.
Aber die gesetzliche Nachtruhe beginnt erst 22 Uhr.
Okay, that is hilarious. So this guy arrives in hell, and he asks, "Why am I here?" And he goes, "Because you flushed the toilet at 8:20 p.m. But the statutory quiet period at night begins at what did he say?
Aber die gesetzliche Nachtruhe beginnt erst 22 Uhr.
It doesn't begin until 10 p.m. It is a matter of principle.
We're starting the grammatical segment, and I hope you understand we're going to have to talk about cases. Coming up with the right case to use mid-conversation is very similar to the Deutsche Bahn experience.
And this is,
and it's always late.
And of course, it doesn't take for. The thing is, it doesn't really take forever if you have actually acquired the system through exposure to a lot of comprehensible input. Of course, there are lots of edge cases as there are in all sorts of languages, and you can actually see, if you ask these questions in German, how many native speakers actually will occasionally be uncertain about certain aspects of this. But on the whole, if you're just used to it from comprehensible input, it isn't going to require a whole lot of time to think about it.
Standard German has 4 of them: nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive, with the latter not really being heard in colloquial conversation anymore.
That's not entirely true. There are a lot of places where the genitive has receded in favor of the dative, von constructions. But there are lots of situations in which it does, in fact, still get used. And it is certainly considered to be the more proper way of speaking. More refined. But I just noticed the time. It is time for me to wrap up for today. Great to see all of you. I hope you enjoyed the stream, and I will be back tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And I look forward to seeing you then. Time for me to eat things. See you later. And yes, the